Welcome to Soundtrack Your Life, a podcast about soundtracks, music, and movies. Each episode features a guest and focuses on a specific soundtrack and the personal stories connected to it. Now here's your host, Ryan Pack.
I don't know if I know the story.
All right, I'm going to remind you during the podcast for a genuine surprise. All right, Ryan, you want to kick out that intro as I speak into my mug?
This is Soundtrack Your Life. I'm Ryan Pack, and this is a soundtrack podcast where I talk to someone about a soundtrack that they have a connection to. Today, Nicole Barlow and Brandice Wilson are back. We're going to talk about the 2001 Wes Anderson film, The Royal Tenenbaums. Nicole and I covered The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou in Season 1. So, Nicole, why are we talking about The Royal Tenenbaums today?
I think there are two great reasons to talk about The Royal Tenenbaums this particular juncture in time. Number one, Royal Tenenbaums is kind of the ultimate cozy fall movie. So if you're listening, grab a pashmina, get your Live, Laugh, Love sign out, PSL, stoke a fire, and just kind of immerse yourself in like the autumnal world of the Royal Tenenbaums. I think it's such a great movie for fall, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I have a mug of tea, for Christ's sake. I have a mug of tea. That doesn't happen.
It's not a pumpkin spice latte because now you just said PSL and that's all I can think of.
Well, I mean, other people might want to grab a PSL. I don't want to alienate our PSL listenership.
I heard you say pashmina, and I only know what a pashmina is because of Animal Crossing.
Listen, I don't know your life. I don't know when you're listening to this. Maybe it's drive time. Maybe you've got a PSL that you just picked up from the Bucks. Whatever it is, it's a really good time to listen to a little rumination on the perfect fall film, Royal Tenenbaums. It is also, drum roll, very near to the 20th anniversary of this film and this soundtrack.
Way to make us feel old.
It was released 20 years ago this December. So get yourself primed for any re-releases, theater releases. I'm sure that's probably in the works. Maybe they'll release like a fourth soundtrack for this movie.
Yeah, because they already re-released it in 2002.
Right. I mean, if there's a soundtrack that's probably been talked about, I can't think of a soundtrack even in Wes Anderson world that's been talked about more extensively than this one. It's pretty widely discussed and well loved and embraced, and I mean for good reason. It's a classic, right?
Yeah, I think this is probably the most famous of his films. I don't know if it's unanimous, but I think most people have this in like their top 3 Wes Anderson films.
It's definitely in my top 3, and not to make this like a tangent about our favorite Wes Anderson films, because that could go on way longer than this podcast has time for. And I won't do that to you, listeners. We won't go. This is about soundtracks.
I definitely think that it's probably, especially Wes Anderson fans, like one of their favorites. But in terms of being the most ubiquitous and well-known outside of like Wes Anderson fans, maybe, I don't know. I feel like Moonrise Kingdom just like got a lot of traction, and that might be the most widely recognized, even though it's one of his newer ones.
Yeah, I mean, given that this film is 20 years old, I'm sure that there's a whole generation of people now that probably don't know that it exists. Or maybe you're seeing it for the first time. But I think that's what's so beautiful about Wes Anderson in general, and particularly about this film, is that it is sort of timeless, and the way that he curates his soundtracks to sort of pick things out across genres, across time, gives it a quality that's kind of out of any kind of chronology, right? Like, it doesn't exist in a particular time frame. It just exists in this world of Wes Anderson, which is great. I think it's also something that people love because it's one of his Mark Mothersbaugh soundtracks, so much like Life Aquatic, which we've talked about on this podcast before, kind of exists in that same world. I know, Ryan, you are down with the Mothersbaugh.
Yeah, and this is the first soundtrack that he did that's also produced by Bob Casale, also of Devo. So Rushmore was the first Mothersbaugh scored Wes Anderson film. but this is the first one where Bob Casale is also credited as working on it.
Yeah, and I think this is, also like the film where Wes Anderson's signature style and approach to filmmaking and to soundtrack curation like really starts to gel. It's right off the heels of Rushmore, where people are starting to understand him and he's starting to gain all this notoriety. And all of this still feels like extremely new, like he's invented this genre, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that like Rushmore, again, another one of like his marquee films that everyone wildly recognizes, but it was still not like full Wes Anderson, right? Like it wasn't as contrived and it wasn't, like really him just having like no one to answer to. And I think that this film, Royal Tenenbaums, is really like the first 100% Wes Anderson film that he made.
Right. It's quintessential. Like it's the blueprint for.
Yeah, exactly. Like every film thereafter, except for maybe his like animated stuff, like really kind of like comes out of this film. And I would say ironically, like I totally agree with you, Nicole, like the soundtrack is incredibly timeless. And that kind of goes into it also being actually one of the quietest things about this film. And I would say his soundtracks are actually the quietest things about any of his films. Maybe it's just because everything else is so contrived, right? Like the acting, the casting, the visuals, the set design, like everything is so meticulous and so contrived. And the soundtrack choices, I mean, the music choices are too, but they feel very natural, right? And they feel effortless and they don't fade into the backgrounds, but they're not obnoxious and demanding attention, whereas literally everything else is. It's like everything else is in like 4K high definition, and then music is like beautiful in there and it supports the tone, but it's not like calling attention to itself in the way that everything else is in a Wes Anderson film, which is interesting to me and ironic because it is so well curated and like wildly talked about, but it's one of the more quieter aspects of like his filmmaking.
Right. And so like if you have the visual of Owen Wilson's character like slapping you in the face with this visual presentation of like a 10-gallon cowboy hat, right? And like Ben Stiller in his tracksuits, you have that against this kind of like very subdued, almost relaxed collection of tracks. And like you said, it's kind of the first time that you see like that intention and that curation and that thing where Wes Anderson deliberately chooses music to fit a scene. That in a lot of cases, and he talks about this, he crafts his story around a particular song. And I think like from the jump, you see this happen, right? From the jump, you get this introduction to the entire Tenenbaum clan. And the introduction is set to this orchestral version of Hey Jude, which, if you know anything about Hey Jude, it's like, oh, immediately, dysfunctional family. I think we're going to get some dysfunctional family drama. So it's this very like twee chamber orchestra. We're going to introduce everyone in that very Wes Anderson way that's now become like basically a trope. Right. And it's set to this version of Hey Jude. Originally, it was supposed to be the Beatles. Ryan, do you know that story?
They wanted to license the original Hey Jude?
They wanted to license the original Hey Jude by the Beatles, and Wes Anderson's very firm, like it's got to end up in the movie. That's how I thought of this scene and envisioned it in my mind. And this is where Nicole gets to tell like a depressing story. I feel like the story has like layers of depression. It's kind of sad. I'm sorry in advance.
Boo.
Pull your pashmina really tight and just go with me. It's kind of sad, but I guess at the time George Harrison was really ill, and in order to get the Beatles at the time to, sign off on the song, they have to see the film, and then they have to sign off on it and say like, yeah, we're all cool. All the surviving members of the Beatles and everybody that like holds the rights to this, like, we're chill. But apparently Wes Anderson was like, well, I'm not going to go to George Harrison, who's like severely ill, and be like, hey, can you watch the Royal Tenenbaums from the hospital? He didn't want to do that. So that didn't happen. Then he turned to Elliott Smith. Elliott Smith, who, of course, has Needle in the Hay on this soundtrack. Elliott Smith, I guess, was also not at a great point in his life. Was kind of a mess. They did a recording session, which probably exists somewhere still, where he did a version of Hey Jude, and it didn't turn out great. And so Wes Anderson wasn't happy with that. And so, of course, he goes to Mark Mothersbaugh and is like, okay, can you make this work? And so the version that's ultimately in the film is kind of born out of necessity because he couldn't get it from anybody else.
And who wants to cover that song anyways?
Right? That's kind of an impossible task.
Yeah, those are big shoes to step into. But I think that, if you didn't know that, I don't think that you'd be like, oh, this is like a miss. Like the way that they handled it was very strong and poignant opening. It's just, now that you do know that, it's like, oh, well, like you start imagining like, well, what could it have been with the original song?
I don't see it as being any better. I feel like the orchestral version kind of gives you that Wes Anderson kind of I don't know, that twee charm, right?
It's like the birth of the twee, but like an accidental birth, like a breech birth of the twee.
Yeah, it's the charm and the playfulness.
I mean, it kind of works with the whole, it works because it's basically a book. We're supposed to believe that the Royal Tenenbaums is the story that Alec Baldwin is reading to us.
Which is so random, by the way.
It's so random, but it so works for me.
Oh, he had this weird voice actor phase for a while. Like, I guess between him marrying Kim Basinger and him becoming Jack Donaghy on 30 Rock.
Right.
He just started doing all these voiceover jobs. So he is the main voice in the Final Fantasy movie based off the video game.
Also random.
And then he is also the antagonist, Leonardo in the Clerks animated series.
Why?
I mean, it's a good paycheck, right? Like if you have a studio at home, you work from home, you like don't have to get up at set or whatever. The hours are more flexible. Like if the opportunity comes knocking, why not?
Yeah. Also, I'd like to invite you all to check out Ryan Pack's other podcast. It's called The Baldwin Files, and he just kind of explores obscure parts of Alec Baldwin's career. Yeah.
I would rather not do a deep dive into his life.
What about into his chest hair, though?
I was a big Kevin Smith fan in high school, so I was excited about the Clerks cartoon. And then my friend Mike was a huge RPG nut, so he was excited about the Final Fantasy movie. I don't think I saw that with him, but somehow I knew that Alec Baldwin was the main voice. Sure.
Again, trying to explain away how you know these things. Just admit you're a huge fan.
Ryan Pack's over there with like a scrapbook full of all the Alec Baldwin like clippings.
He's wearing a t-shirt with like his face on it right now.
He's wearing a t-shirt with his face on it. And he has like a pennant banner that just says Baldwin.
Just all that cheap wine is just bringing these memories back.
Yeah, so this podcast is being recorded at night, by the way. Normally we record these podcasts during the day, but this is Soundtrack Cast After Dark. And Ryan, I guess, in his dark office.
Soundtrack Cast?
It's late. It's late. Okay, the moral of the story is that it's late.
Or they're late
for us. It's after 9 p.m., people.
Oh my God. Again, don't out like people as old. Stop with this 9 p.m. business, or like speak about yourself and don't include me in this.
Okay, but the point of this story, not to out anyone for being old or feeble or unable to stay up past 9. But Ryan tried to get this set up for us tonight, and in the process apparently kicked a duffel bag that had some old wine in it. And so the atmosphere for this Royal Tenenbaums podcast for Ryan is just cheap, broken wine. The whiff
it should be like Turkish Delight or something kind of pretentious like that.
Turkish Delight.
He's getting secondhand drunk right now. It's cool.
Like for Wes Anderson, it should be like, oh, I have this box of perfectly symmetrical chocolates with that toothpaste crap in the middle.
Okay, Ryan is officially high on wine fumes, so we're gonna see how this goes. Be prepared.
Did anyone think as they were watching this film that the Royal Tenenbaums is like the OG but more highbrow Arrested Development, or is that just me because I'm such an Arrested Development fan?
I mean, they came out, pretty close together, right?
I don't think so. Wasn't the first season of Arrested Development like 2004-ish? 5-ish?
2003.
Ooh, almost. Close. Yeah, so this was before that, right? Math? No?
Yeah, so it was basically 2 years before.
Okay.
But instead of Ron Howard, it's Alec Baldwin.
I think it was just, yeah, right. We don't know anything about Ron Howard. It's
the whole 6 seasons in a movie actually started with the movie.
I think this is just a really prime time for dysfunctional families, maybe. When is it not? They're perennial, evergreen. Who doesn't love a dysfunctional family? I mean, they're definitely similar. They're parallels, we'll say.
Mm-hmm. I was a little bit sad that the Dalmatian mice didn't have like their own little like tune, not gonna lie. They're like the full highlight of the film to me.
I mean, it's not a Disney film, Brandice. They're not going to make a dress for you.
But it's Wes Anderson, so close.
Well, they're not going to sing a song, but, Mark Mothersbaugh could have given them a theme.
We're going to save this conversation for our Fantastic Mr. Fox episode. So I want to talk about the other scenes from this movie that are iconic, that are so tied to songs that for some people that are of a certain age or they're really into this movie, like I have been over the years, that they're just completely linked. I think for me, what this podcast is really about is it's, the visuals that play in your mind and the way that when you hear these songs, even later, they harken back to this piece of cinema. And I think one of the big ones in this film is that scene where you see Gwyneth Paltrow's character get off the Greenline to These Days by Nico.
Yep.
I mean, is there like a more iconic intro to a character than that? I feel like that is just such a perfect scene.
I agree with that.
Silence is we agree. We're all imagining it in our mind.
The jury finds in your favor. Again, like it's this perfect kind of like, you see her in like full it girl form, and Nico starts playing her being this kind of ultimate it girl herself. Speaks to New York. It speaks to the time that you're in, the season that you're in. It gives this kind of like sense of longing between her character and Richie's character, and it's just like a perfect scene. And I mean, all Wes Anderson movies are beautiful, and I think the music really does so much to support that in this film in particular. There's just like a chef's kiss to everything.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big scenes. I definitely feel that way with Needle in the Hay. Mm-hmm. It is the only way you can make Elliott Smith even sadder. To set it to a suicide attempt.
Right. Right. And I mean, and this came out, I think before Elliott Smith himself passed away, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Yeah.
Although the timeline is hazy. Yeah, I mean, that scene is, I think for a lot of people, kind of imprinted in your brain. Like it is so interwoven with that song that I can't hear it without thinking of this movie. And that's rare.
Yeah, like I've heard Needle in the Hay like a million times. I have that self-titled album. I mean, that song is super sad by itself, but when you see it in the movie, it makes sense. Like it's not too on the nose, even though it should be too on the nose.
Right, but somehow it's just left of center enough where it doesn't quite feel, it feels unexpected, I guess, is what you want to say, which is, how a moment that's so dramatic should feel. And I always feel weird talking about like scenes like this in the films that we discuss, because is it a spoiler? This film is 20 years old. Like we know what happens, right?
I think anyone who's listening to these episodes is aware that we're going to discuss plot points. So unless we were like talking about Fight Club, I think we're good.
Fight Club. Please watch the movies before you listen to this podcast. Please don't give us a bad review based on the fact that you haven't done the homework.
Right? It's not our fault.
Yeah, especially if the movie's like 10 years or more, or 10 years older or more.
We're not reviewing films currently in theaters or streaming for first time, so.
Is that the statute of limitations for you, Ryan? It has to be 10 years?
Honestly, I think it's like 5.
5 years? Okay, fair.
Personally, with like streaming and binging, I feel like there is no statute of limitations because everyone started watching things at different times. That it would be like we could never discuss anything, right? So
there's no statute of limitations because no one's forcing you to listen to this podcast.
Well, sure. I mean in life. I don't mean in this podcast. I mean in life. I feel like if someone is about to talk about something and you haven't seen it, it's on you to say, no, spoilers. It's not on the person to not say spoilers anymore. I think that has shifted with the exception of Fight Club, just because that's like the joke.
Do you hear that, folks? It's on you. Straight from Brandice's mouth.
Why are you listening to the Royal Tenenbaums episode if you don't want to hear any spoilers about the movie?
Right.
As previously promised, we're going to shame all of our listeners.
I'm having a bad day.
Ryan's just sitting in the midst of broken glass, broken dreams.
The wine is now he's now on like the downer side of the wine high.
Definitely. Just the smell of like skunk wine lingering in the air.
Past 9.
That's how I imagine the rooftop smells like, with like the 10-year-old cigarettes and the hawk droppings. Every time that I see like the scene, I'm really smelling that scene. It's very visceral for me.
The hawk's name in this movie or the falcon is Mordecai. And I don't know why, but I've always wanted to name something Mordecai until in real life I met someone named Mordecai. Brandice knows what I'm talking about without saying too much, but then it ruined it for me. Does it ever happen? I don't know if that ever happens to anyone else. Where
You've already said too much.
Yeah, it's like put up on a pedestal. Like, wouldn't that be a cool name to like, I don't know, like bestow on a gerbil or whatever random pet comes into your possession? And then you meet somebody with this random ass name and it just blows the whole plan out of the water.
I've always wanted a kangaroo and I would name him Ferdinand and he would be my personal assistant.
That's until you meet a Ferdinand.
Right? I haven't met one in person yet, so...
It's going to ruin it for you. Take a word for it.
It's like the new version of like, don't meet your heroes. It's like, don't meet your wannabe namesakes. I don't...
Yeah, kind of.
Oh.
So back to the Tenenbaums.
So back to the Tenenbaums. You guys know we do this. This is what we do.
Tangents? Never.
Maybe because I'm not a huge Paul Simon fan. I feel like Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard just sounds like a Wes Anderson movie song. At this point in my life. Like when I hear it, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's like what would be in a Wes Anderson trailer. Like I feel like he owns that song and not Paul Simon.
That's fair.
It is fair. I mean, both like sonically and lyrically, it's unlike Needle in the Hay being kind of like a fresh and unexpected choice, probably at that time in particular. That song is very like, okay, now you're just hitting me over the head with twee. I feel just like smothered in twee. It's just too, mama pajama, roll out of bed. Da, 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 da. It's just too much. It's too much. And it's that whole montage. It's that whole montage of them like going around town and like, yeah. I get it. I get what you're saying. It's a skip. It's a
like skip. No, I'm not saying it's a skip, but I just feel like I was like, oh, it's not in Moonrise Kingdom. I'm pretty sure it was also in Moonrise Kingdom.
Right? Has anyone done like a spreadsheet, like cross comparing all of the films and the soundtracks and see if there's any repeats?
I'm that Always Sunny meme with these films, like in my basement with the string, like trying to figure out what's going on. Yeah, I get what you're saying though, Ryan. It also feels like because things are attached to scenes, the energy of the scene and what they're trying to portray, like obviously not everything is going to isn't going to have the same like sonic quality, but there is kind of an overall like Brandice said, like very subdued, strummy, guitar-driven acoustic vibe to this, like a very warm, crackling, fall leaves on the ground kind of vibe. It's got Nick Drake, for example. It's got, some vintage Stones songs from Between the Buttons, which appear like back-to-back in the movie, but are not back-to-back on Between the Buttons, just FYI, for those keeping score at home.
But we also have some Clash and Ramones, which is very, very punk for Wes Anderson.
Very punk for Wes Anderson, but also like very, like Ramones in particular, very like scene setting, I guess. It's like, oh, hey, we're in New York now. That was so bad. I'm so sorry.
Well, for our, like podcast bingo, we hadn't checked the Nicole does an offensive
accent
in a while, so
I'm walking here.
We were due for that one.
Oh, it's so bad, guys.
Speaking of that, can we talk about the taxi? What the hell is with that taxi cab?
I don't know, Brandice. What the hell's with the taxi cab? You tell me.
There's only one taxi cab in this neighborhood. I don't understand. I'm with you with the Dalmatian mice, and then we end on the Dalmatian himself, and everything is falling into place. But that taxi cab is just stealing so much of the scene every single time.
My favorite thing about Brandice's movie opinions when we do this is that she gets hung up on something I have never once really thought about.
Oh, here's another. So when I was in film school, I watched this movie with the audio commentary track on, and Wes Anderson is very meticulous, and to the point where it's actually kind of insufferable to listen to the audio commentary. But there is a conversation with Gene Hackman and Angelica Houston in the park, and at the beginning of the scene, you see a guy run by them, and as they're walking back to the apartment, later that day, you see the guy run again, and Wes Anderson was like, that was intentional. The guy was running the entire time.
Sure. Okay.
It's the same guy. I wanted to make sure, it's the same guy.
There's a little bit of ego there. I think that was an editing mistake.
Well, I like you said, I don't listen to the audio commentary because as much as I love the dude, he's not somebody that you want to listen to talk. I'm one to say this right now as I'm rambling about nothing. You don't want to listen to Wes Anderson talk. Listen to me talk. So much better.
I don't know if you guys have ever cracked open his actual screenplays, but they are full on novels. It's the textbook on what not to do if you're a first time screenwriter is write literally pages of stage directions for each scene. It's insane. So I can only imagine the commentary would be just as thorough.
Yeah, well, the Between the Buttons thing, he's very specific about I don't want you to think that, I had my playlist on shuffle or anything. I understand these songs don't actually appear back to back on the album, but I wanted it that way because that's, it went better with the emotion that I was trying to carry. And we're okay, we get it, Wes Anderson. We get it. You're an artist. We know.
With a little bit of OCD.
Oh, just a little.
Just a tad.
Just a little.
A twinge.
A twinge. A twinge of twee of OCD.
So this is clearly a fall movie.
Yes.
But he uses Christmas Time Is Here, which is very much a Christmas song.
I had questions about that. I did notice. I was like, isn't this a Christmas song?
Isn't it the Charlie Brown Christmas song?
Oh, it is. It is. It's actually a joke in my extended family that this is. I find this song to be horrendously depressing. There's something about it that just brings me down. I know some people it lifts them up and they think it's super attached to this idealized version of Christmas. I think it's a freaking bummer It's a bummer.
No, it's a bummer. It's Charlie Brown's Christmas tree that can't even support one ornament.
Well, right. I mean, it's a depressing. The whole thing is depressing. Not that we're talking about Charlie Brown, but yeah, it's melancholy, right? The song is melancholy.
That's the perfect word. But again, it's like, it's not that time of year in the film. So I still have questions about that one. That was the one song that I had questions about.
Well, I bet Wes Anderson would have an essay, like a whatever, 20 feet high on your desk by tomorrow to explain it to you.
Well, Ryan, you listened to the commentary. So did he have commentary on that you remember?
I don't, but this is I'm going to use this time to do a Wes Anderson critique.
Hot takes.
Uh-oh.
Hot takes.
Wes Anderson stands. Hold on to your water bottles. Plug your ears.
Yeah, hold on to your cheap wine so it doesn't break. Ryan's got an opinion.
And this was brought up by my brother-in-law. So he watched Isle of Dogs, which is, at least at the time of this recording, the most recent Wes Anderson film. And that film uses a piece of score from a Kurosawa film, from Drunken Angel, which is one of his, classics. And he was like, I don't like how he used it. He just kind of used it in like this transition scene, like in Drunken Angel. In Drunken Angel, it's a really stirring piece of music. Like when it's used, it's like a really pivotal scene. It kind of seems like Wes Anderson just kind of threw it in there because he could. And I kind of feel that way about how he uses Christmas Time Is Here. Like he uses it in a melancholy sort of way because it's, I believe, a Margot and Royal scene. But it has nothing to do with Christmas or them talking about, how he let her down during a previous Christmas when she was a child. It has nothing to do with Christmas. But he uses Christmas Time Is Here just kind of because he can.
I feel like that's a bit different though. Like using a song not to its full potential, like to your brother-in-law's point, to me feels very differently than using a song that feels out of place and so incredibly random. I don't think that soundtracks have to be like say on the nose. I want something more unexpected, but Christmas is just so specific. Like Christmas can only refer to Christmas, and that's it. And this is like not Christmas, so it just makes no sense to me.
I can only postulate, and I'm not Wes Anderson, but maybe there is something close to what Ryan said where it's supposed to harken back to childhood and that, sort of disappointment idea, or, the things that have fractured over the years. And I think it's just such a damn sad composition. Like it's just such a sad thing. Who knows? Who knows the history behind it? If anybody knows the history of why that was selected, tell us. Educate us.
It's to set you up for a needle in the hay later.
That's a whole other episode, like a capsule unto itself, too. Like, other than Needle in the Hay, what's the most depressing song plus scene in a Wes Anderson movie? Because there are a few. I know that Wes Anderson gets, for some people, there's some flack, right? That his movies can be kind of cold or emotionless. But for me, there's some scenes in his movies that are just hitters. Like, they will reduce me. They are sad.
I think it's that, like, whether or not you appreciate understatement, right? Mm-hmm. Because they are understated, even like the super sad scenes, and everything is so contrived. So if that resonates with you, then it does. If it doesn't, you're never going to feel that scene, right? Like I feel like that's why Grand Budapest Hotel is so polarizing, is because the subject matter is especially sensitive for so many people. And for all those people who are like understatement and that treatment doesn't like hit, then they felt like it was a bit disrespectful. So I can certainly see that, like that sort of treatment, like not hitting with like a lot of people. But if you're a Wes Anderson fan, then obviously like it hits you. And there are a ton, I don't remember the music specifically for Grand Budapest, but I can imagine there are like so many like super like tragic scenes in that film.
Right.
that I'm sure like really stand out.
Right. It's understatement. You know, I think that's really the key to all of it, is that it's not maudlin, it's not saccharine. It's these very understated moments of reveal from people that you don't expect that from, or that maybe have been up to that point in the film like really withholding. Right. Like there's this scene with Ben Stiller's character Chaz, where he just tells Royal, like, I've had a bad day, Dad. And I don't know, for some reason, every time like that scene really gets me. That like moment of understanding between them is great. That Van Morrison song they play over the funeral at the end also, that's a whole contender, right?
Yeah, definitely. The like no one speaking definitely doesn't like sit well with me either. So like the music and just like the scene and the fact that like no one's talking, I think makes that such like an emotional scene.
Yeah, it really like it runs the gamut, and the soundtrack kind of runs the gamut with it in terms of kind of this emotional roller coaster that you go on with this movie. There's also like a very, you know, kind of like romantic bent to this film, right? Like those Rolling Stone songs that get used in this film are basically like in the film they play off of Margot Tenenbaum's like little record player, and that scene that they have together in the tent where you get that back to back of those two songs of She Smiled Sweetly and Ruby Tuesday, like two songs that everybody kind of knows, and you know they could be interpreted as being like, it's too on the nose, right? But they work. They're just like warm and sincere, and there's also that quality to this movie that's like really nice. It's just, you know, a movie that like you want to drink a mug of tea to, guys.
I do feel like the soundtrack kind of genre hops a little bit more than I'm used to with Wes Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you have a little bit of punk, you have Elliott Smith, who made music in modern times.
Mm-hmm.
Elliott's music has a lot of classic rock influence, especially kind of Beatles production on his newer music. You know, it fits, but it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb because, you know, you kind of have this timeless quality with the visuals, and he usually pairs that with classic rock. But here you have a song that was like recorded in like 1995.
Yeah, I mean it definitely like it takes those risks and it genre hops like that without losing the essence of the film and without losing kind of the immersive quality that brings you into that world, which I think speaks to how well curated it is, right? It's just a very smart collection of songs that are attached to these very specific moments, but none of them take you out of this imaginary place. They just draw you like further in. And even the ones that, you know, you kind of like maybe see coming or expect. Like Paul Simon, you know, Paul Simon is still like, if you think of Paul Simon and Simon and Garfunkel and you want to set the scene for fall, is there anything more fall than like Simon and Garfunkel and Paul Simon? I don't know, for some reason, those are also really linked in my brain. Like when I picture sweaters, I just see like Paul Simon.
In a turtleneck.
In a turtleneck and like a knit.
As long as it's not from Graceland.
No, I just, you know, it's like, it's very Paul Simon and some like dappled light under a tree. That makes sense to me. My brain gets that.
Yeah, I think, you know, with like Nico and Velvet Underground, I definitely get more of like a fall sort of vibe from them. Yeah,
and I think it's, you know, no coincidence that Nico appears twice on the soundtrack. You know, you get Fairest of the Seasons, and you also get These Days, both from Chelsea Girl, both, again, very like scene setting little tokens that tell you it's fall in New York, but also kind of give you a mood. They kind of like, you know, set you into this mood, and that mood kind of carries through. And you get Stephanie Says by the Velvet Underground too. So yeah, a lot of Velvet Underground and Nico that pop up in this. It's kind of more dominant than anything else, right?
Yeah. maybe not to the point of, the Bowie connection from Life Aquatic, but it's definitely, I guess, like a theme of the movie.
Right. It's kind of like that nice little undercurrent, right? Where it pops up just often enough to remind you of these cues that you're supposed to remember about like where you are. And yeah, I almost kind of feel like it's thematic and that it connects so much to Margot too. I feel like all of her, moments and are kind of scored that way.
So the 2 Rolling Stones songs that are in the movie are not on the soundtrack, and according to Wikipedia, it's because the Rolling Stones don't license their songs to a lot of movies. I thought that was interesting because you would assume that if anyone would be able to get the Rolling Stones, it would be Wes Anderson. I know as of recent times, I think on the Scott Pilgrim versus the World soundtrack, I think Edgar Wright was able to get a Rolling Stones track.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, they can't be that protective if it, made it into the movie. It's just weird that they wouldn't allow it to, live out on the world as part of the proper soundtrack. That is interesting. I'm always kind of fascinated by the process of this. And I, do part of it for a living, but this idea of like reaching out to artists and how much they actually know about what they're licensing. And I think it really depends on the individual artist, because I think some of them really don't care. And some of them are like so enormously like protective and gatekeeping like everything that they've ever done in history that it's insane. There's a story that I read where Jackson Browne, the singer Jackson Browne, wrote both of these Nico songs and does not remember licensing these at all. Like, he just straight up doesn't remember. Like, he heard it one day and he's like, oh yeah, I heard it come on in the movie. And I was like, oh yeah, that's my song. What? Really?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on how much they're entrusting like their managers and stuff too, right? Like, how heavily involved are they? How much are you directly speaking to the artist versus like their people?
Right, because I think some artists completely forfeit all that responsibility and just collect the checks, and others are really protective. I would love to know how it works for Bob Dylan, because I want to imagine Bob Dylan having to watch this movie for some reason. I don't understand what's happening. It's really good.
Why is there no emotion? And why does that work with my songs?
Here's Wigwam. It's not off one of my better albums, so it's fine.
All right, so there's a segue. You have a story to share with us.
Speaking of Wigwam.
Well, it's a story that involves all 3 people on this podcast.
Does it? How can neither of us, for the record, dear listeners, neither Ryan nor I remember this story? So I have many questions about how it
Oh, you will in a moment. I promise you will. So there is a song called Wigwam on this track, a song by Bob Dylan called Wigwam. This is one of those songs that I don't attach to the Royal Tenenbaums because, unfortunately, my mind hasn't linked to a completely different moment in my personal history. So picture it. It's pre-COVID times. Ryan Pack used to host these, every once in a while events that, took place at theaters, live stage, people telling like their stories, music performances, basically kind of like a really cool open mic night where you could do whatever you want to do. And we would all go see it. So Ryan is hosting one of these open mic nights, right? He is kind of informally the MC. We watch some bands perform, some singers, some great storytelling. It's a nice little night that we're having. Brandice is there with me in the audience, even if she doesn't remember it, but she's there.
Okay, no, I actually do remember this story. I just didn't remember this song because I think my ears were just ringing the whole time.
Yeah. So she's there. Okay. We're seated next to each other. We see all the nice acoustic bands. The night is going very well and as expected. And then, the things that we have signed up for seeing with our eyes have transpired. And then we see some cardboard boxes in the shape of kind of, like an air duct get brought to the stage. And we hear from the inside of these taped together, like, collection of, like, you just picture a bunch of Amazon boxes, right? We hear a bunch of pounding and somebody trying to get out. And from the boxes pops a person that we all mutually know, wearing nothing but his underpants, covered in flour, dust, chalk, some kind of white, chalky substance. And he bursts free from the box. He grabs a broom from the side of the stage, and he starts sweeping away all of this debris that has, at this point, completely exploded to every corner of the theater stage. And he's doing it all practically naked to the tune of Bob Dylan's Wigwam. So it's just naked man sweeping. Like, sandwiched in between, like, the very lovely acoustic guitar person and, you know, the woman telling this very heartfelt story about her childhood. This is what we see.
But again, per my earlier comment that was not recorded, if it's something that visceral, that affects you that much that it sticks with you for 15 years or so and you like cannot get it out of your brain, then I think it was pretty effective, right? Art is supposed to make you feel things even if they're uncomfortable.
I'm absolutely not knocking it. What I'm telling you is that it is in an indelible place, imprinted in the back of my brain. And anytime that I hear Wigwam, if it's in the context of this movie or anywhere out in nature, this is what I think of. So yeah, I mean, good job, good show. I'm never going to fully be able to deconstruct what the F that meant, but it happened. So yeah, I hope that next time people hear Wigwam, they think of somebody practically naked sweeping a stage. That's
it
what I
was
hope.
The most unexpected and unique piece of performance art I've ever seen.
I don't know, from him, I thought it was kind of expected.
Well, I mean, unique and unexpected is expected from him, yes, but that particular execution of it was memorable.
Yeah. I remember it being a Dylan song. I didn't remember it being Wigwam specifically.
I didn't remember the music at all because I was completely just like speechless from first just the pounding. And I'm like, what's happening? What's going on? It's like all lights out and you just hear this like huge deep pounding and you're like, what the hell? And then he like bursts out of the box and I'm like, holy shit, is that so-and-so? And then he's like covered in this like white chalk and I'm like, what the fuck is happening? And then he's like practically naked and I'm like, oh my God, this is too uncomfortable because I know him. And then he starts sweeping all this shit up and I'm like, huh. So yeah, all that's going in my mind. Like there's not enough room to process what song is playing behind that.
I don't know, for some reason that just the song choice like really heightened the absurdity for me. And so it stuck, and it's still something that I can't shake it.
Same. I do want to extremely clarify that when I said I don't remember it, I literally didn't remember your Wigwam story. I very much remember that performance art.
Okay, good. I think some mysteries are just meant to, remain mysteries. So why Wes Anderson used Christmas Time Is Here in this film, why any of that happened at Ryan's event, we're just never going to know. We're going to have to look at that.
I asked him to do something, and that's what he thought of.
That's why it happened.
That's why it happened.
He was invited.
I asked him to do something, and that's what he thought of. Did he ever give you a heads up?
I think he asked me like parameters of like what was acceptable. And I was like, well, obviously like don't light anything on fire.
But again, it's like not that playing music is like, we don't want it. Like we love music and like readings. We love readings. We love these things, but these are very set like parameters, like things that people knew that they could do. It's safe, right? He went completely outside of the box.
Literally
outside, like tore that box apart and did something completely unexpected.
I'm pretty sure that was like wood, not cardboard.
Yeah, I don't think it was cardboard. I think he like beat through like thin plywood.
I see, that's the part I don't remember.
I remember the pounding being like very intense and I was like, oh my God, like whoever is going to like, I maybe knew it was him, but I was like, they're going to hurt themselves. I definitely think it was more intense than cardboard.
Just imagine being backstage and being like, what's going on?
Oh my god! Wait, you didn't get to see it?
No, I saw it, but
Okay, you saw it from like the
between acts, I'm like, checking like, oh, is the next person ready? And then I'm like, oh,
beep.
Sorry.
Edit. Edit. No names.
So I'm like, this guy, him and his box that him and his buddies were pounding together before the show started. I guess it's time for that.
Now it's all coming back to me that you're completely right. They looked like they were a bunch of cardboard boxes, but in reality, it was like he was breaking through wood, and then ultimately all the debris that like splashed onto the stage was like plaster. It looked like plaster. Okay,
and all the like whatever chalk was like on him too.
Anyway, I'm sorry for that really long segue. I just figured you guys should know that this is the kind of stuff that Ryan drags us into. Is these performances where people.
These are the things that we have the privilege to experience because we know Ryan.
My life would be less if that hadn't happened to me.
Oh yeah, it's like, definitely in like my top 15 of that time frame. Yeah, for sure.
I thought it was a good way to go out.
That was not sarcasm.
As far as doing those shows, that was a good way to go out.
Now Ryan only does podcasts safely from his wine-soaked desk. All right, so I have a question about the soundtrack.
Yes.
So notwithstanding all of the score, the Mark Mothersbaugh score. So Mark Mothersbaugh score. I can't talk tonight. This is what happens when it's close to 10. Grandma needs to go to bed. Dream about Wigwam.
Grandma.
Don't dream about Wigwam.
Anyway, what I was going to ask, even though my mouth won't let me talk correctly, if you have to pick one song to kick off this soundtrack island, what do you kick off? What goes? I think we know Ryan's answer.
Did he leave us? I was waiting for him to give his. My answer is the Christmas song, obviously.
Is Ryan there?
I don't know.
I'm like, dude, I may just want to kick off Wigwam now.
You've ruined it for him as well now.
I'm so sorry.
That's usually my job. I'm the one who ruins things for people.
I'm going to kick off Hey Jude.
Ouch.
Really?
Well, this version of Hey Jude.
Youch. Well, I'm going to kick off Me and Julio down by the schoolyard.
Tell us why.
For the aforementioned reasons, that it just feels a little bit, too obvious. And it's just, as much as I love Paul Simon and Paul Simon associated things, it's a little obvious. It's too well-known choice.
Ryan, why'd you pick Hey Jude?
I think I've heard that song like 5 billion. I've seen McCartney play it live, so I feel like I'll just stick with the original version.
Seeing songs live.
Like the humble brag that you stuck into that conversation.
Right? It's like, I've seen this in concert, so I don't need to hear it in a film.
Yes, Sir Paul invited me to see him live, so
I can only envision that song by the original performer.
He serenaded me personally.
Well, final thoughts on what you guys think makes this soundtrack one of the good ones?
I think we covered off on this, but just to reinforce, it is very subdued, but in like a good way. It just fits so naturally into all of the spaces and really like enhances the tone without calling attention to itself. And I feel like almost all of the cases, I know you guys feel a bit differently about some of the songs, but I think it's just such like a seamless, like warm, cozy, very natural, effortless curation.
It is cozy. I think that's the word that has escaped me this entire podcast. This thing is just so damn cozy.
You said cozy at the beginning of the podcast. I stole that from you.
I said it in a different way, but it's cozy. It's cozy. For sure.
I think in 2001, a soundtrack like this was pretty unique. To have bands like the Velvet Underground and Nico. Like, I feel like it happens a lot more now. I think once Garden State became a thing.
Oh, I don't know if we can speak of Garden State on this podcast. Has anyone read Garden State on this podcast?
No, we can do it. We can just. I have a lot of.
We can muscle through it.
I have a lot of opinions on that movie.
All right, maybe we'll hate watch Garden State.
You know, I'll just say this: I don't hate Garden State as much as I hate people who love Garden State.
That is completely fair. Because you know what? If you're gonna choose, like, because I almost feel like these films are somewhat related in terms of like time period and tone and the thing that they're going for, right? But there's clearly like the premium version and like the version that you ordered on Amazon. And I think we know which is which.
Garden State is another one of those films that I've actually never seen.
Wow.
It also has Nick Drake and Paul Simon on it.
Oh, it's such a good point. See, because same vibes. It's very like, we're just going to go for that like acoustic fall vibe that I think rapidly turned into, you know, bad playlists for bad coffee houses in the 2000s. So I think what makes this great for me is that it's that exact distinction. It's the distinction between, you know, something that is thrown together for the sake of the mood, but you don't really feel like it's personal and considered, versus something like the Royal Tenenbaums, where everything is done and chosen with such great intention and, you know, put to these just very memorable scenes and visuals in a way that I think really epitomizes, you know, like why this podcast exists, which is that it makes an impression on you and it becomes kind of part of your life and your history and the way that you see the world. So I really like this movie. I don't know if you can't. This isn't obvious by all the times I've said cozy.
I wasn't sure. I was trying to determine if you liked it or not, but it wasn't crystal clear.
Were we unclear on that? I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that I like this movie.
Maybe you should say it one more time just to be absolutely clear.
I like it. It's really great. So great.
Thank you, Brandice and Nicole, for coming back and talking about another soundtrack with me.
Absolutely. Always happy to drop in.
Thanks for allowing us to keep doing this for some reason. I promise not to ever come on one of your stages and sweep naked.
Well, I appreciate that. So you can follow us on Instagram at SoundtrackCast, on Twitter at soundtrack_your, email at soundtrackcast@gmail.com. Leave us a review on whatever platform you're using. Unless you're Thunder Mug.
Yeah, we don't want to hear from you anymore.
I actually want to hear more.
Agreed, yeah. If you are Thunder Mug, please leave a very detailed review, and we will create a very special podcast where we review your review.
It'll be a bonus episode. Subscribers only.
I really want to do that now.
Only mugs.
So stick around. We've got one more episode with Brandice and Nicole this year. We'll be doing our Christmas episode, and hopefully you'll join us for that. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.